Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council of Australia, and welcome to the first of our Green Careers and Sustainability Month webinars. We're very excited about the month, and thank you very much for joining us. Because of the time of the day, obviously we've still got some people coming in to join us, but we will get underway. Before we start today, I would just like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work, and to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters which we may visit upon in our work. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm hosting this particular webinar on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway, just to let you know that this session is being recorded. We do have the chat function open and available for you today, and we would encourage your comments and thoughts as Peter goes through his presentation. If there is time at the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask Peter any questions. At that point, just to make it easy for us to be able to facilitate those questions with Peter, we would ask you please to put those into the Q&A button, not into the chat function. It's just easier for us to be able to see. As I said, this is the first of 4 webinars as part of our Green Careers and Sustainability Month. And so next week, we'll be welcoming Dr. Mary McMahon and Dr. Elizabeth Knight to talk about sustainability. What does it have to do with career development? And then the third of our webinars in the series is Professor Philip Gonnan, who's talking about skills for greener economies and society, the potential of apprentices. And then we'll finish off the month with Professor Stuart Carr, who'll be talking about decent work, sustainable livelihoods and well-being. If you're interested in any of those particular webinars and you haven't yet registered, again, as with this one, they're free to attend. The whole month is being sponsored by Seeka. And so just visit the events page on the Seeka website where you'll be able to register for any of those particular webinars. So we will begin. Just before we do begin, Peter is having some internet connectivity issues from where he is in Denmark this morning. So he will actually have his camera off, but we will have audio with Peter. So we do apologise for that. If Peter does happen to drop out over the course of the next hour, please be patient. He will be coming back in to join us. But with those connectivity issues, we just thought we'd be upfront and let you know about that. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be able to welcome Professor Peter Plant to kick off our month. And I think when we were putting the month together, we thought no better person to set the month off than Peter. Peter's worked in the field of career education and counselling since 1974 in schools, higher education institutions and in employment services. He's taken part in many European projects on guidance, including consultancies to the EU Commission and to the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network, and globally in various expert capacities, including the OECD, the European Foundation for the Improvement of Working and Living Conditions, and the European Training Foundation. His latest bit of work and assignment is with the University of South East Norway. Peter actually runs a small organic farm and is active in rural policies in several national and regional funds in his home country in Denmark. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to welcome Peter and invite him to share his screen so that we can get underway. Are you still with us, Peter? Okay. Well, it's showing me that he's there. So can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, I can hear you, and I'll start sharing in a minute. Are we getting there?
Yep, that's great.
David?
Yes. Yep, we can see it on your screen now. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do have some connectivity problems here. As I live far out in the countryside in Denmark. So that's what it is. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this brief talk here. As you can see here, and you won't be seeing me, but this is what you'll be seeing of me. I've been engaged and am engaged in local developments. So that's enough about that. When I started talking about green guidance and sustainability about 25 years ago, it was seen as weird, far out, and radical. So it's interesting to be back now, to be opening your month of sustainability in terms of career guidance. So thanks very much for that. One of the things I'd like to put forward to you today is the idea that, in fact, we're just asking a very, very simple question, which is, what is, in fact, the impact of your career choice in terms of sustainability? And it's interesting to see that this simple question is now being translated and information materials and career education and all kinds of activities. I've mentioned here is the American one, which is the Career One Stop Center, which has this particular feature on its website, which is find more than 200 green careers in these 12 sectors. So it's the whole idea about looking into, if you like, green careers, green guidance, sustainability is now a mainstream feature. But we're still in the early days of that, and I'll be putting forward the point of view that, in fact, we're the utopians of our time. We'll get to that. What I'll be claiming throughout this brief presentation is that when we talk about green guidance, sustainability, and those kinds of issues, it's not just about choosing a green job. In fact, there's much more at stake here. And you could perhaps even say that this is a new mindset or even a new paradigm. So we're actually perhaps the forerunners of new developments, new societal developments, but also in terms of personal development. And of course, in terms of our jobs, the career industry, as you call it in Australia. And we'll be discussing through this month, and I'll just talk about this briefly, but what in fact are green jobs? And I know you'll be diving into that much more during your month here. But that's a really interesting question in itself. What kind of jobs are we actually talking about, and how do we promote these kinds of jobs and the educational and training options that go with them? I've made this brief little list here, which starts off with the question marks here. How about carbon trader, hairdresser, builder? Are these all green jobs? And in fact, they're all listed in the Career One Stop Center Green Careers. So it's not just me claiming this. It's in fact United States Informational Service for Career Guidance Development that took up all these three. But in fact, I visited a whole bunch of green activities. You can see them here on the screen, ranging from green activist, if you like, to greenkeeper, to lawyer, to comments on that, whether in fact we're now coloring everybody's hair to green. But it's interesting to look through a list like this and to see perhaps that there are sustainability aspects and green aspects, if you like, of almost any kind of job. One recent one was the Danish newspapers claiming that warfare can now be more green than it used to be. So it's spreading. Perhaps you could just claim plainly that all work has some kind of environmental impact. And as you can see here on the screen, it ranges from garbage collection to planting new trees and bushes. I've taken a few Australian examples, and you're probably familiar with some of these, but LinkedIn has made some kind of research, this was in 2022, where they actually try to see which sectors are most hiring the most green jobs, but also the fastest growing green jobs and the fastest greening jobs. And you can see from this list here that in fact it spreads over a whole bunch of sectors, from construction to manufacturing, but also public administration. And the fastest growing jobs, green jobs here, are seen as sustainability manager and so on. But also, I think an interesting aspect of this analysis is that they operate with greening jobs, where engineering, HR, and risk management come up on top here. And I thought I'd just relate this to you because these are Australian figures, if you like. This is an Australian a small piece of research, but it's indicative. And also, if we look perhaps a bit closer to some of the Australian stuff, which you'll be looking into, I'm sure, during this month, you're all very well aware, of course, of the work studies curriculum with the skills for learning and work and the career and so on design, where some of the elements here are learning to learn work skills, entrepreneurial behavior. What we put in here, and I'm borrowing this from Tristram Hooley, United Kingdom, are these kinds of questions. What new learning does the climate crisis require? This is where the climate crisis came in. What skills, this is the skills box, will be necessary to make Australia to net zero, but also entrepreneurial behaviors, learning about green entrepreneurship and sustainable business. And if we look to the other side, the other right-hand side here, career development and management, some of the questions there are considering how career choices interact with environment, the nature of work, considering how the nature of work is changing, and gaining and keeping work, asking what the workplace competences might be in a green business. So these are examples. I'm sure that you'll dive into this much more during the month here, but it's interesting to see how with these kinds of curricular ideas, we can actually develop them into what I've labeled here green guidance, sustainability issues in terms of career development. Just share this with you. There are other examples as we go along, but these are Australian. You've done wonderful work already. I'm just adding a little bit here. What I'm trying to get at here is that in fact we're not just doing more of the same. We're in for a paradigm shift, and that's when this is Kuhn, normal science is rendered incompatible with new phenomena. So there are new things on their way, and we'll try to see what it actually implies. But this is a radical shift in terms of what the kind of thinking we've been doing so far. And it's also interesting to see that even in macroeconomics, these kinds of radical shifts are now taking place. One to the left-hand side here is the so-called donut economy thinking. This is Kate Raworth, which is now, if you like, world famous. It has this figure where the social foundation and the ecological ceiling actually interact. And there's the shortfall, as you can see in the figure here, and an overshoot. Where you know, items like climate change come up quite heavily to look into and to understand the nature of macroeconomics. And I'll not go much more into that, but it's really interesting to see that, and we'll get to that, even major organizations like the OECD, for instance, is now also thinking along these lines. And on the right-hand side, Robert Freeman with his stakeholder theory, where he says, up till now, when we've measured the performance of companies, we've looked to what we call the bottom line, but he's claiming there's more than one bottom line here. Economics is just one of them, and that we're all stakeholders in a broad sense. So these are just two examples that I'll share with you in terms of this macroeconomic thinking, which are now taking sustainability matters into account. I've looked a bit into international developments in the career guidance field, and this is a Canadian example where in the curriculum and based on the idea of human rights, career education in Canadian schools has taken up this idea that in fact part of career education and thus career guidance and career development must take climate and climate changes into account. So in fact, these two wonderful kids here were up for a demonstration. And it's not, I'm not saying everyone has to be an activist, but it was really interesting to see that they took it as far as being activists. And in terms of career development, I'm sure they learned a lot of skills here. This is just one Canadian example. But of course, the, if you like, big example in this area is the Swedish woman, girl, Greta Thunberg. In Swedish, this one says "Skolstrejk för klimatet," which means I'm on strike for the climate. And one of her recent books is the climate book. She's had a huge impact in Europe anyway, and I'm sure the name is also well known with you. She's seen as an icon, if you like, and referred to quite often by young people in terms of what should I do with my life, a very basic career question, of course. But also, if we look into closer into our professional field, most of the countries that have some kind of curriculum in career guidance, and most do, also have some curricular ideas. In some countries, of course, it's quite well developed. And I've mentioned here the different activities in some of the European countries that I've been working in, where green guidance, in fact, is now creating a new relevance for career education across schools, across sectors as well. This is supported by the Education for Sustainable Development, UNESCO activities. And if you have a chance to look into anything in this field, this is a highly inspiring spot. there's a bunch of materials and curricular ideas, and also, as you can see, conferences and so on, which UNESCO put on, world conferences for education for sustainable development. And one country is taking this even further. The whole idea of education for sustainable development has been taken further by Ireland, so that it's not just sustainable development education, but it's actually career education for sustainable development. So now career education and likewise across the educational system, where the focus on sustainability is now running through the whole educational system from kindergarten to university in Ireland. And I've had the good fortune of working with the Irish career guidance industry in this field. And it's really interesting to see how a country can make this, if you like, a general feature running through the whole educational system, where career education, career guidance, career development is seen as pivotal and central to the whole idea of education for sustainable development. So here we go from being on the periphery to being a central element in education for sustainable development. I just wanted to share that with you, because also in terms of linguistic difficulties, Ireland for you, of course, is easily accessible. So if you want to look into a particular country, here's Ireland for you. I've borrowed this one from Tristan Hooley, who reminds us that there are both moral and skills questions in this area. Those moral questions include some questions like, do I understand the environmental implications of my work? And do I have a responsibility? But also the skills questions, do I actually have the skills to make a contribution, a positive contribution? And how are my skills going to have to change as my organization and work changes? So it's interesting in terms of career development and career guidance and career education activities to pose these questions. And this is, I'm sure, what lots of practitioners and policymakers address these days. And if we take it a bit further, again, inspired by Tristan Hooley, we work closely together on this from his point of view, which is the social justice point of view. He's helped us to put on our green glasses, and with these headings, build critical consciousness, name oppression, question what is normal, encourage people to work together and work at a range of levels. These are taken from one of his recent books, edited by Dane, a Finnish person, and Tristan Hooley from the UK. These are some of the basic questions that he puts there. We and I are now combining the two, if you like, the social justice point of view with the sustainability and green guidance point of view. So here those two issues come together. If you want to look into this, there are some helping questions and headings below here. I'll not go further into that, but just to say that even from that point of view, from the social justice point of view, that there are also inspirational points that we could take into the green guidance movement. And talking about movements, I just want to dwell a little bit about the idea of utopians, because especially when I started off advocating the point of view of green guidance 25 years ago, I was seen as, I think I mentioned in the beginning, radical and far out and utopian. But I just want to remind us that in fact there have been wonderful utopians before us who were also preoccupied, focusing on career education and career guidance. They use different words about this. But even 500 years ago, Thomas More said that every citizen must be a learning individual. At that point, of course, they should learn farming. He didn't see the idea of unemployment. Why don't they all work? But not every day and not for 10 hours. 6 hours would be quite enough. And also he was into lifelong learning. Of course, he was addressing in his days some societal issues. And this was his idea. They were seen as radical and utopian, as was the case with Frank Parsons. I think in the career guidance industry, most people would know about Frank Parsons. What they don't know perhaps so much is that he was so radical that he actually had the idea of a completely different society, society based on what he called Christianity and brotherly love, which was called the society of mutualism. But he also thought that women should have a right to vote. He was really radical. But there are quite a few others that are also interesting. This one is the French, Charles Fourier. He had the idea that, and he was also interested in career development. He had the idea that work should be passion. He was French, as you can hear. And he said that his idea and his ideal society would consist of 1,620 people, because he had found out there are 810 types of character. And he even made a drawing about this. And some of his ideas were also translated into, if you like, concrete. As were Robert Owen's. This is from Scotland. He was a Welsh person, but he was also interested in creating what he called a superior social, intellectual, and physical environment. And one of the ideas was that you don't just go to work, but work also implies education. And he had dancing classes. I love that one, so that you could also do rhythm and musical exercises. But I'm just saying that these 3 or 4 utopians, of course, were seen as far out and radical in their days, but they were addressing some of the societal issues of their times, as we are now talking about sustainability and green guidance. So I'm putting us into the category of utopians, people who are thinking forward, but also seen as a bit far out and radical in their time. But let's see how it goes. Because perhaps what was seen as peripheral and far out just a few years ago is now being much more mainstream. And I'm just showing you this particular one, which is in fact from the OECD, the Economic Organization and Cooperation, that's what it's called. But what I wanted to show you here is that in terms of resources for future well-being, which is the bottom here, they've added some new key dimensions, which of course is the natural capital, the economic capital, the human capital, and the social capital. But if you can see just above that line, environmental quality comes into that. These are all indicators of well-being. And it's interesting that this organization doing this kind of research is in fact preoccupied with economic development. But you can't do, this is the idea here, you can't do economic development without thinking about the environmental quality, the natural capital, and so on. So it's really interesting to see how some of these organizations are now turning around. In fact, I would say that this is a bit of a swing. It's close to a paradigm shift. And it's also interesting to see how this comes from the HR area, that ideas of balance. These are Japanese ideas of balance, the ikigai, where you balance what you love, what you're good at, what you've been paid for, but also what the world needs. This is the mission, and you can see the vocation here, profession and passion, linking together and balancing each other. I'm just showing you these as examples of new ways of thinking that I'm sure are already in some parts of career guidance, but I'm sure these will become much more, these ways of thinking will become much more mainstream. One particular country in which I've been working over the last 7 or 8 years That might be also of interest in this context is in fact Norway, where in the National Quality Framework for Career Guidance, they've actually pointed to some of these dilemmas that we work with in career guidance. This also includes dilemmas that, reach far out into the green guidance area, change in stability, for instance, but also mean context. What is the personal part of this, but also what is the context of my career choices, and likewise with opportunities and limitations. It's the first quality framework that I've seen that works with these dilemmas rather than with a blueprint, for instance, which I've seen in Canada, Australia, and the United States, and New Zealand. And I think this is a very fruitful way of looking into quality frameworks, and I'm sure this will also have an impact on the way that we work with sustainability issues. There are lots of dilemmas. I mean, I run an organic farm, but I have a diesel tractor. Nice example, isn't it? Norway, again, Norway is one of the great oil-producing nations on the world, but in fact, their focus is now turning away from that. And as you can see here from the screen dump, if you understand Norwegian, the heading here is the green jobs of the future, Fremtidens grønne jobber. And it's interesting because this is the state TV channel, Norsk Rikskringkasting, which in fact is now promoting the idea of green jobs. With little portraits and little 10-minute snippets, they actually indicate that these are the future jobs. So this is the official line of an oil-producing country, Norway. And it's interesting to see how this is now seeping into career education as one of the basic materials, and one perhaps of the main basic materials for career education in Norwegian schools. So these are just little glimpses into what some countries are doing. We're getting towards a bit of a landing here, but I wanted to take this to a level of more, if like, analytical approach. And with the good help of my friend Tony Watts, with this figure with 4 parts, we're looking into guidance with a focus on society, on individual, and on the other hand, the change and the status quo, which gives us these 4 radical, progressive, conservative, and liberal approaches to career guidance. One of our students, this is Rebecca Packer, turned this into a focus on sustainability and what we call a green guidance here, and helped us to understand that there are different approaches that she called dark green and light green, where the dark green is the radical and progressive, and the light green are the conservative and liberal. The radical one is preoccupied with social change, the progressive one with individual change in this figure, the conservative one, we're into light green now, with the social control aspect, and the liberal one with the non-directive. And I've used this with my students to help them place themselves in 1 or 2 of these parts of the figure. And it's really interesting because we get into a kind of discussion where, we discuss with ourselves and among ourselves where we would like to be and where we are. And quite a few of my students start off with the non-directive approach, because this is embedded in a lot of career guidance work, but gradually get into a discussion of how and perhaps why we might move into the more dark green area rather than staying in the light green area. But of course, these are profound, if you like, standpoints or viewpoints that need to be unfolded and be discussed on a more analytical basis. And this is what this figure might help us to do. it's helped me anyway a bit in my thinking, and thanks very much to one of our students, a British student, Rebecca Packer from Derby. So what I'm trying to get at here is that I see guidance and career guidance, career development, and career education as part of the solution to a lot of the, to some of the predicaments that we have just now. Today, we talked mostly about climate change, but we could talk about all kinds of other sustainability issues. And I'm sure that during the month you will unfold this a bit more. But I wanted to take you through some of the thoughts we've had over the years here, but also to see perhaps what could be our role here. Do we see ourselves as the utopians of our time, and are we in for these kinds of more, if you like, profound changes, both of thinking and behavior? And could we perhaps call this a bit of a paradigm shift? So I'm using these rather big words because I see guidance, and in fact, as a major move, a major shift. And I think that's what I would like to share with you today. Do I just stop my sharing here, David?
You can do, Peter, if you like, and we do have some time, obviously, for questions. So if anybody has any questions for Peter, we would ask you to put those in the Q&A button. I think there are some questions there, Peter, but before we get to those, I think that you've provided a wonderful launching pad to our month, and I think you've really forced us to think about what our role is as career practitioners. What role do we play sort of in this changing world? And I think that's really important, because I think what we're seeing, not just here in Australia, but obviously around the world, is that the move is on for more sustainable work and for greener jobs, and what does that actually mean, and what role do career practitioners play in the work that they do with their clients, in this notion of green careers and sustainability. So the two questions which we've got at the moment, which probably lead into that. So I don't know if you can see them, Peter, but
I've got them here. I've got
Sarah. Great.
I've got Sarah and Matt. Can we take Sarah first? Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah.
Sarah, thanks very much for your question about the greening job. It was an attempt based on this LinkedIn Australian small piece of research, which the way I've seen it, the way I've read it, is that it means a job on its way to, considering sustainability issues. So it's a job that perhaps doesn't obviously lend itself to sustainability, but perhaps it's changing its nature. So on its way, I would say that's probably what it means. And in terms of the second one from figure with the four approaches, that in fact the idea of being unbiased or even neutral is heavily embedded in our way of thinking, and I think it's really interesting that we should discuss that, and I'm sure there is a great great place for being unbiased. What I'm suggesting here is that in this unbiased approach, if we take that approach, it would be interesting for us to, for instance, provide learning opportunities, job shadowing, work practice, and so on, in areas that lend themselves to sustainability issues, a way we could show people, both young and older, what does it actually mean? Can you actually be a lawyer and work with these kinds of cases? Could you be a builder? I mean, it would be interesting to see how, on an unbiased basis, we could reflect some of the societal pressures and needs, so that we don't have to encourage or discourage, but we could widen the field in terms of some of the approaches and some of the perhaps practices that we have just now. And one of my favorites is, in fact, work experience programs that take this into account. I've quite a bit, particularly in recent years in Norway, where in fact work experience is embedded and also part of the curriculum, where it's all it's called it's created, if you like, a new particular interest in the subject in the Norwegian school, which is called utdanningsvalg, which means in fact educational choice. And within that framework, it's really interesting to see that there's now a focus on greening and green jobs. So it's still unbiased, but it certainly has a renewed focus. I don't know whether that was any use to you, Maja, but these are some of my thoughts.
I think I'll just put in the chat, Peter, just giving people just one last opportunity if they've got any questions to ask you. Maybe just while people are thinking about that, I might just recap on what we said at the beginning, was that we are in the first of our month of webinars. And just a reminder that next week we've got Mary McMahon and Elizabeth Knight talking about sustainability, what does that have to do with career development, and then another one on the 15th and the 22nd. If you're interested in any of those, please visit the Seeka website, click on the events tab, and you'll be able to register for those. As I said at the beginning, they're all free. The month is being supported and presented by Seeka. It looks like, Peter, there are a couple more. Just some thanks that are starting to come through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks very much, Christabel and Fiona.
So if there's no more questions, we might wrap the session up. Peter, thank you so much. It's always difficult when you've got internet connectivity issues, but you've done an amazing job at pushing through that. So thank you for that. And to everybody who joined us today, thanks for joining us for the first of our 4 webinars. But I think, as I said, Peter, you've we're very honoured that you were able to kick off the month for us. I think that anyone that's sort of followed this notion of green careers and career guidance, you are one of the names that has been leading in this area. So it's been a great opportunity to have you to join us at the beginning to kick off our year, obviously, of our webinars, but obviously to kick off this important month for us around green careers and sustainability. So thank you, everybody, for. So there are we do have a bit of time, Peter. There are just a couple. There's something coming through. Wondering how secondary counsellors, so we're talking here about counsellors in secondary schools, can work with other disciplines regarding sustainability futures. I think what Linda is talking about there is other faculties, other departments in schools.
Yeah, of course, this is an issue, I think, in almost any kind of school setting, isn't it? That we tend to work in silos, and we need to work across sectors and and subjects and so on. It's been interesting to me anyway over the years to see that the relevance of different types of subjects like languages or mathematics and so on seems to creep up almost every time that we have students in some kind of work experience. There is, if you like, a reflection from the work experience back to the relevance of school, and vice versa, if you like. So it's been. I know it's more complicated than that, but in fact, quite often when you're out in if you like the real world, you will see much more the relevance of schools and school subjects. And I've seen that quite a bit over the years when I've been working in and with schools, that students come back and say, oh, now I understand why I need to learn to calculate and speak a few other languages, because when I was out in my work experience, I saw the relevance of school. I don't know, that's a very simplistic answer, but I think that's what we've got time to do just now.
And then one more. It's great to see that Jana has joined us. She has a question for you, Peter, as well. I think can you see that in the question?
Yeah, I can see that. Hello, Jana. Jana is one of my good friends, and it's lovely to see you here, Jana. Thanks very much. This is Jana from Finland. We're covering the whole world. And you were up early today, Jana. Career competencies, just one, I think perhaps a structural answer here is that in Norway, where I've been working for the last 7 or 8 years, we've actually introduced now a whole module on sustainability in career education and career guidance as part of the basic training for career guidance practitioners. So we're getting there. I know it's a formal and structural answer, but that is what we're doing just now. But it's also interesting to see in a lot of the master thesis work that I've been supervising, in particular in Norway in the recent years, but also in other countries, that sustainability issues and how do we work with this and what does this mean, this green guidance, and all the competences that go with that are now creeping up and becoming subjects of master thesis work. So it's very high on the agenda and quite topical. I think that's what I managed to say just now in terms of Jana's question, but it is really interesting, I think. So, you know, other kinds of things that will focus on green careers, sustainability, green guidance, and so on.
Okay,
yeah,
Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you for getting up early. Thank you for working through the connectivity issues. It's been a pleasure.
I'll go feed my sheep.
Have a lovely day. Thanks everybody that's joined us, not only in Australia, but obviously all of our international colleagues that have joined us today, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our second of our 4 webinars for the Green Careers and Sustainability Month. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.